friends, good to see you again. I know you may have noticed the pace of videos slowing down a little bit, and I apologize, but it's been pretty busy over here lately. As you know, There is continuing to prep and refresh the repertoire for its slate of upcoming shows for the end of 2022 and early 2023. Taka and I are continuing to slowly but surely work through some more Smile songs and round off some works in progress. I have an original song idea that naturally I've procrastinated on for the better part of this year. And finally, I've been working on a couple of other really cool projects. One of which is this guitar that I figured I'd make a video about and show you what I've done to date and what I've learned through the process. Before I get started, 2 bits of housekeeping. One is that tickets are on sale at the link in the description to our limited capacity Providence, Rhode Island show on November 18th, and I'm so excited to see several of you guys there soon. The other is that old YouTube classic of be sure to like and subscribe and tap the bell if you haven't already, etc., which now 27,000 of you have already done and for which I thank you immensely. If you remember, I did a video a while back talking about one of my other beloved Squier guitars. That was the classic vibe Stratocaster, into which I put the new Cunife wide range humbuckers. If you haven't seen it, the link to that video is above and in the description, so go check it out. I received a lot of great responses to that video, including many who agreed the stock pickups in that guitar held their own surprisingly well. Or maybe not surprising at this point, since I do believe Squier has been up to great things over the past few years. As There gets ready to time travel back to 2003 for our run of tribute shows to the legendary Glastonbury set of that year, I was inspired to try my hand at sending up one of my favorite guitars from Thom's journey, his classic 1970s black Telecaster Deluxe. There are actually quite a few different offerings from the Fender family in the 2 humbucker Tele Deluxe category, including artist signature models, the Ventera series from Mexico, the American Professional series, and now, as of the making of this video, the American Vintage 2 series, which is probably the closest to the vintage mid-70s spec of the guitar, including those very same Cunife replica pickups as I demoed in the Stratocaster. However, the price point on these guitars, especially the American Vintage, but even the Ventera, is a little more than I was hoping to spend for what I knew would be sort of a project guitar that I could experiment with Thom's wiring mods and perhaps even a bit of its decorative flair. I knew that Squier had a classic vibe version, which luckily was offered in black and looked fantastic for a very, very reasonable $450 US. Knowing what I knew about the quality of the Stratocaster, I felt very confident that I could take this guitar where I needed it to go. I will add that while I'm super open to an official partnership with Squier and Fender, I did not receive this guitar, but instead did buy it with my own cold hard cash. So everything you will be hearing is my actual opinion on the guitar. If you would like to buy this guitar yourself, I've left a couple affiliate links in the description. I do receive a small commission at no extra cost to you if you do so thank you in advance for supporting this channel. Out of the box, my first impressions of the guitar were very positive. I loved that the neck profile, which is described as a C shape, had just the tiniest bit more thickness to it versus my Stratocaster, which was also called a C but was fairly thin. On the downside, the polyurethane gloss finish on the back of the neck was a lot thicker and stickier than on the Stratocaster's, but I was able to fix this easily in a process I'll describe later. I love that they used the vintage style feed into the center hole tuners, which they did not use on the Stratocaster, because they are way easier to restring and are actually possible to de- and restring with the same set when you want to futz about with the electronics, as I did several times. As a Hendrix fan, I'm also a huge proponent of the late 60s and 70s style big headstock look, even if that era of Fender isn't always seen as the high water mark for the brand's quality. The output jack assembly and the prong which makes contact with the instrument cable tip were a little loose when I first got the guitar, which was leading the signal to cut out a bit, but this is easy to fix by taking out the jack and bending the prong back a bit, or by replacing it with a marginally more expensive yet higher quality jack from a maker like Switchcraft. I knew I was going to replace and relocate the jack, so I didn't worry about this, but it's a minor bummer on the QC front if you weren't looking to mod the guitar. The fretwork looked excellent, with smooth ends and a nice, shiny, narrow, tall shape, and there were no high frets or notes choking out along the neck anywhere. There were 1 or 2 tiny dabs of excess lacquer next to a few of the frets, but these were just a minor cosmetic blemish. They're barely noticeable, and they did not affect the playability or the ringing out of the notes on the guitar at all. The body is fairly light, and I love how it has the belly contour like a Strat, so it makes it one of the more comfortable Telecaster guitars to hold and play for extended periods, which I'm guessing may be why it was one of Thom's mainstays for a long while. So what did I do to it? Well, if you're also a student of the King of Gear's website like me, you know that Thom drastically simplified and rearranged the electronics on his Tele Deluxe and Tele Custom that were used during the band's mid-90s to mid-2000s era. He used a single volume control, no tone controls, and he relocated both the pickup toggle selector switch and the output jack to the holes that were previously occupied by the removed pots. He also placed and later replaced a few choice stickers as well as a P-bass bridge cover. As a start, I opted for the basic electronics mods, and I'm considering some of the more cosmetic ones. For the electronics, I was pleased to discover that while the original pots were the miniature alpha variety, 500K volumes, 250K tones, the holes in the pickguard were already large enough to fit the wider 3/8 inch thread of the full-size CTS audio taper, 500K pot, and the pure tone output jack that I purchased. I only had to drill to widen the hole into which I would put the Switchcraft toggle, since that was an even larger thread size. I did all the rewiring myself using vintage cloth pushback wire, which can be easy to use and fun for that vintage element and look, but I did find it often frayed at the ends to a very annoying extent, so good old-fashioned PVC wire would have been just fine, or even fancier kind of shielded braided wire if you're into that kind of thing. I really recommend folks that are interested in modding or knowing how to repair their guitars learn how to solder, since it's a fun and a very useful skill, and it's great to practice with a pretty simple circuit like this minimalist controls layout. I also gave the guitar a customary basic setup from my friend and local luthier legend Dave Patillo, where we swapped the 9-gauge strings for standard 10 to 46 ones and gave the nut slots a touch-up accordingly. The action and feel that we were able to achieve was excellent for a Fender scale length, hard tail, body strung through guitar where sometimes excess tension is hard to avoid. Finally, I had heard from many a source that the solution to a sticky poly neck finish was a gentle sanding maneuver. I'm always a bit nervous about irreversible mods or anything involving finish or materials removal from a guitar, but I'm pleased to say that this was a very easy and extremely worthwhile process. I actually used green Scotch-Brite, which is the equivalent of about 600 grit sandpaper, which could also be used, and I did several gentle, slow passes up and down the neck, being careful of the body finish, the neck's edges, and the fret areas. The end result looked and felt nearly identical to the lovely satin finishes on many of my more expensive axes. So one of the pitfalls I ran into as part of my electronics modding process was that I originally attempted to fit a standard short-length Switchcraft toggle switch into the electronics cavity in the location of the former tone knob. This led the output solder joint from the toggle switch to be pressed up against the edge of the body cavity, and it made the pick guard difficult to push back into place. I then noticed my pickups were sounding and measuring fairly weak, and I feared that I had overheated and fried the volume pot, lowering its resistance level, or I had damaged a pickup wire. What actually was happening, to my best guess, is that, as a pleasant surprise, the body cavity, when I took the pickguard off, is painted entirely with shielding paint, which is conductive, and it's tied to a ground lug that, along with the bridge ground wire, gets soldered to the common ground point on the back of the volume pot. So when the toggle's solder joint was touching that shielding paint, some, but not all, of the pickup signal was being dumped to ground, causing that weaker sound and reading. Thanks to the sage troubleshooting advice of Mr. King of Gear himself, I surmised the issue when the pickup's volume pot and the output jack all read perfectly fine with the pickguard outside of the guitar. So the solution was an easy one. I instead purchased a right angle, or what's sometimes called an L-shaped toggle switch, also made by Switchcraft, although I located a Gibson branded one at my local shop, Russo Music. I was able to use this to keep the important connections closer to the center of that electronics cavity and away from its walls. I put tiny pieces of electrical tape on both sides of the pickguard where the remaining unfilled selector and volume knob holes were, and may later add a sticker on top of the former like Thom did. Also similar to Thom, I chose a Stratocaster style volume knob for the single pot instead of the period correct witch hat knobs that were there before. Overall, I'm super pleased with how the guitar turned out. Even though I do use my tone controls a decent amount, especially on very bright guitars like my Jazzmaster with its 1 meg pots, I felt myself somewhat liberated by the simplicity of a single volume pot. With a 500K pot value and these particular pickups and no tone pots adding impedance to the signal, the pickups are beautifully glassy and clear at full blast without being too shrill since they're still humbuckers. And since without any type of treble bleed modifications, a volume pot also rolls off high end a little bit when rolled down, so there's still some hidden versatility. The new switch and jack location are pretty interesting, and I guess the former is less likely to be inadvertently strummed out of place. I still want to find a good way to cover up the old jack socket hole, maybe some kind of plug or something. With the body shape, weight, and sanded neck, it's an extremely fun and comfortable guitar to play, and I think it sounds great. I'm excited to bring it into the rotation for their shows, but also to put it through its paces on my own work. And I fully recommend the guitar and any of these mods to my fellow guitar enthusiasts. Again, kudos to Squier for this amazing series of affordable yet highly playable guitars. Thanks to Dave Patillo, the King of Gear, my local Russo Music for their parts in helping me bring this guitar up to fighting shape. Stay tuned for more content, be well, and I'll catch you at the next There show.